So when it comes to Star Wars, most people can agree that the original trilogy is probably the best, or at least a pretty decent movie trilogy. The same cannot be said for the prequels or the sequels. Now, before I talk all about the sequels and why I hate them and why you should probably hate them, I'm going to talk a little bit about the prequels because it's pretty hard to criticize the sequels without explaining why the prequels are bad in a different way that is not so damaging to the Star Wars franchise. So there are a few main problems that people tend to stick to when they say that they hate the prequels. Myself included, because the prequels, let's be honest, aren't as good as the original trilogy. Again, if your opinion differs from this, that's fine. But the main problems most people have with them consist of dialogue, everything about Jar Jar Binks, and some bad CGI, as well as most of the characters being written pretty poorly, usually having to do with the dialogue. But the thing about these problems is that they aren't damaging to the two main things about Star Wars that are at the center of what a movie is and what Star Wars is. These two things are story and lightsaber fights. The fights in the prequel trilogy are pretty much the best Star Wars fights I've seen so far. The Clone Wars TV show also consists of a lot of good lightsaber fights, and technically some people do consider that part of the prequels. But even though the Clone Wars does improve upon the prequels, it came out a lot later than the prequels themselves, so I don't really consider them part of the prequels. And also, I think the story holds up pretty well when it comes to the prequels, with a few exceptions, like Palpatine convincing Anakin to kill Count Dooku by just saying 2 words. Do it. Ah yes, what a convincing argument. He said do it, now I must do it. If the world worked like that, then everyone who ever watched this video would be subscribed. You know why you should subscribe? Doesn't matter. Do it. But a big thing about the prequels is that the story doesn't undermine the original trilogy. In fact, I think it builds onto it. It builds onto the characters of Obi-Wan and Darth Vader. And while the characters are written pretty horribly, like both Anakin's are pretty annoying, Padme gets pretty uninteresting after The Phantom Menace, there are still enough good qualities in these movies for me to enjoy them, maybe with the exception of Attack of the Clones. That being said, they're still pretty bad. They're not the best movies out there, but they're golden compared to the sequels, particularly The Rise of Skywalker, and that's mostly what this entire video is all about. So without further ado, time to talk about the sequels. Is Episode 7, The Force Awakens, whatever you want to call it. Despite all of its flaws, I do think that this isn't a bad movie. I do think that is a good way to start the trilogy, even though there are a lot of big problems with it. The biggest and most overwhelming problem is that it's so obvious that they are just taking everything from A New Hope and just copy and pasting it into this one. And this would be mediocre. Like, if the sequels were just carbon copied from the original trilogy, that wouldn't be bad, and that wouldn't be good, in my opinion. Actually, it'd be a little bad because, it had a lot of potential, but whatever. But the biggest plot hole or problem is the Empire just comes back out of nowhere under a new name and a new logo that has more written in it. So we're in the opening credits of the first movie in this trilogy, and that already undermines part of the accomplishments in the original trilogy. This movie also ruins any chance of having Han, Luke, and Leia all on screen at once, one more time. I guess it is technically possible for that to happen in another project that takes place in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, but that's not going to be possible for a very long time because Carrie Fisher died, and I will give this trilogy a pass for that because they couldn't control that. We would have to wait a very long time to see anything resembling Han, Luke, and Leia on screen again together, and even then it would have to be fakes and things, so it wouldn't really feel the same. This movie also pretty much stars Rey as the main character. This is the first time that we've actually had an entire trilogy led by a female main character, and while that's great and all, it does kind of have a few downsides. Now, the idea of having a main female character, whether it's the antagonist or protagonist, is a good one. The problem is all of the little things you have to jump over as a Hollywood studio to avoid certain problems when this happens. One of those things is that a guy cannot beat up a girl in a movie. In a modern-day movie, that's just not allowed to happen. I challenge you to pause the video and think of 3 movies that haven't completely flopped. I mean, like movies from actually big companies, not just some random movie that your cousin made when you were in middle school. I challenge you to think of 3 movies where either a male villain beats up the female protagonist or a male protagonist beats up a female antagonist. Now, this isn't all bad. Obviously, they want to avoid certain imagery like that, but there's a good way to avoid that and a bad way to avoid that. Let's take a movie that is generally pretty well accepted. Let's say Thor Ragnarok. Now, Thor Ragnarok is a pretty good movie, I'd say. I think a lot of people agree with that. If you don't, then I don't know, you're kind of lost. Just kidding, that was a joke. But when you're first introduced to the main antagonist of the film, Hela, the first thing that Thor does is throw his hammer, Mjolnir, at her. The first thing she does is she grabs it and just crushes it with her hand. She then proceeds to take Thor and Loki and beat the crap out of them. But when it's time for Thor to do that at the end of the movie, because it's the whole hero's journey thing, the hero eventually overcomes the villain, they have to make things different, because you can't just have Thor beating up his sister on screen. Instead, what happens is they unleash Surtur, however you pronounce that, basically this giant monster that destroys Asgard and Hela with it. Now, that's a good solution to that. That is a good way to get around the idea of having Thor beating up Hela. I feel like it didn't take anything away from the story, and the movie was still very good and widely accepted, so there's no problem, right? Yeah, you would be right. The problem is when movies like The Force Awakens try to do the same thing, but when they jump around hurdles that you have to do in movie making, it's not done well. Instead, you have Rey beating up a Sith apprentice at the end of the movie, and just throughout the entire movie. There is no point where I thought that Kylo Ren was an actual threat to Rey and in any way, shape, or form. Every time they are confronted, with the exception of once, just so she could get captured and break herself out, even though other people were coming to break her out, she bests him in everything. Mind probe, she even makes a Jedi mind trick. All this stuff happens without her having any training. If you look back on A New Hope, Luke doesn't actually do anything Force sensitive. The only thing he does is when he blows up the Death Star, he kind of uses the Force a little bit. Once. That's the only time he ever even uses the Force at all. The only other time anything remotely Jedi-related that he does is when he picks up a lightsaber for like 10 seconds at the beginning of the movie. Rey might as well be a master already. I mean, she bested a Sith apprentice and has zero training. It doesn't matter if you're a Skywalker, it doesn't matter if you're a Palpatine, it doesn't matter if you don't come from an important bloodline in the Star Wars story. That just doesn't make any sense. This also means that Kylo isn't even a respected villain in this movie. Like, from the very start, you think, oh yeah, this guy, he's not messing around. With Darth Vader's intro, he walks in over a bunch of dead bodies. So you can tell he's an intimidating villain, he's not messing around. With Kylo, it's a pretty similar thing. There's a burning village, he walks up, he kills this old guy, and then immediately Poe doesn't take him seriously. And bam, that's the moment where Kylo Ren is no longer a respected villain. Because these characters aren't afraid of him. They just kind of take him as a joke. And even though Kylo is sort of a threat to them, it doesn't feel the same as Darth Vader or pretty much any other character. Now, how could have this movie just been pretty fixed while staying to the basic plotline that it already has? Well, there are about 7 things I would say that would have made the movie a lot better, even if it had to stick with the same awkward storyline. Number 1, Kylo should have been a more respected villain from the start, more secretly conflicted, and only reveals his face when he finds Han to highlight that moment. And no temper tantrums, those were kind of funny, but just no. Number 2, have Poe not disappear and just come from nowhere later in the movie for some reason. This way, he can be the pilot that helps them escape off of Jakku, which is a Tatooine, by the way. This way, Rey doesn't have to just randomly know how to fly, and she like doesn't even mention that she knows how to fly earlier. The only reason we know Luke can is because he says he was taking flight lessons or something similar to that at the beginning of New Hope. Rey doesn't even do that. Number 3, Rey should have sold Luke, because this means that she actually has a character flaw. One of the things you'll notice about Rey is she has 0 character flaws. She's overpowered, she's widely accepted by everyone, all the traits of Mary Sue. I'm not even going to get into that. But obviously, if you're living alone on a desert planet for your entire life, wouldn't that kind of make you a sort of, I'm going to look out for myself, screw everyone else sort of mentality? This wouldn't really even affect the plot that much, because BB-8 would probably just find Poe when TIE fighters start showing up and whatever. But it would still improve things, because it shows that Rey actually isn't perfect. No one is perfect. Number 4, have Han already be part of the Resistance and just not meet the main characters until the battle at the whole Maz planet, Force planet. Because if he doesn't meet those characters until later, sure, it might affect the plot a little bit. You might be like, oh, well, how do they get to the Force planet? It's pretty simple. Just say that they have a fuel malfunction thingy, I don't know. Just pull off a Phantom Menace and say, oh, well, we're running out of fuel, better get to this planet. because he's the only one nearby. Next up, number 5. Rey shouldn't have so easily resisted Kylo's force mind probe and so easily have done pretty much anything in the movie. It's almost like she didn't struggle at all when Kylo was interrogating her. And maybe she could have just been rescued by the rescue party instead of breaking herself out for some reason. Or maybe she'd be like halfway through breaking herself out when Han and Finn and everyone else found her. Maybe you could make a comedic moment out of that to make up for the lack of comedic moments earlier that didn't make any sense in the first place. Also, why can't you understand Wookiee? Never mind. Number 6. Han should have just fallen onto the floor, not into the abyss, and then have his body be recovered by Chewbacca. Proper funeral later in the movie or in episode 8 would have been a better way to send off the character instead of just mercilessly killing him off. Number 7. Kylo shouldn't have been beaten by Rey, it should have just been a draw. And the reason for this is you can still maintain a little bit of respect for the character. You can literally just have the crack in the planet just sort of like open up between them in the middle of the fight anyways. So there, those are my fixes for the movie. Let's move on to The Last Jedi. I'd say The Force Awakens wasn't too terrible, but it has some flaws that aren't fixed on later, and while it was a good way to start the trilogy, this does come back to haunt the entire thing. Okay, so The Last Jedi is complicated. So many people hate this movie with a burning passion, and so many people think that this movie is really good. I am right in the middle. I have a lot of moments that I do actually really enjoy in this movie, but I have a lot of moments that I hate a lot with this movie. Now, when I first saw this movie, I was a little younger, so I thought the movie was good, but then I hear all these people saying bad things about it, and when I was eventually writing this whole episode, or video or whatever, I did rewatch the entire trilogy just to see what my modern day opinions would be on this movie. And so, these are my opinions, and the ones that are based on that, because I wrote stuff down during the So let's just start with the positives, because there actually are a few that I want to make clear I actually enjoyed and think they probably benefited anything that was left to be benefited. So 1, Rey is now a nobody, which I think this is good because it just shows you don't have to be a Skywalker to be a powerful character, which also shown by the broom kid at the end of the movie, which isn't even referenced in the next movie for some reason. Luke does do force protection, and while for the greater part of that plot line, I think it was really stupid, it is a cool showcase of a power ability, just kind of showing that Luke is still a very powerful Jedi. 3, I liked it when Poe took over the ship. I thought that was a very interesting scene. Again, pretty isolated because I hate that purple hair lady, but whatever. Also, I know I'm supposed to be somehow rooting for the purple hair lady, but I'm not because her plan sucked. She just didn't tell anyone about it, and even then, the plan was super mediocre. And number 4, porks. I love the porks. I don't know why, I just do. So now for the things that I do not appreciate and quite just hate about this movie. First off is General Hux is just not a respected villain anymore. The first scene he has is, again, mocked by Poe and all of this, and he's like kind of just treated like garbage by Snoke, which I guess is still redeemable, but even later he's just kind of taking a sidekick role as Kylo Ren. And again, everything that happens with this character is redeemable in this movie. If it were to be redeemed at the end where General Hux does something really evil or something, I would probably have more respect for him, and then in the 9th movie, he would be, just a little bit more intimidating. Of course, the 9th movie doesn't do that, because the 9th movie doesn't do anything good. But we'll get to that later. Also, I feel like the blue lightsaber is really portrayed as Rey's. It's not Rey's, it's not even Luke's, it's actually Anakin's. Next up, Rey's training is garbage. She trained for like 3 days and she had a total of 3 lessons. Even Luke Skywalker got more training than that. Luke Skywalker sort of had a montage and also had some training in between the movies, but there is no time in between episode 7 and episode 8. She's just, the same, I can do everything just because I can sort of thing. Also, I feel like Poe's character is inconsistent with how he's portrayed in the first movie in the trilogy. Snoke also kind of wears something that a 90s rapper would wear in a music video. Like, he's just wearing this golden sparkly suit for no reason. Like, come on, what happened to just wearing gray and black like every other villain in this entire franchise? Also, Luke's character arc started as sort of a good idea. If you have Luke as a broken hero being redeemed maybe about halfway through the movie, I thought that would have been actually really good. The reason for this is the Empire just comes back out of nowhere, meaning that basically everything he was fighting so hard for just came without him really being able to control any of it. And I thought that it made a lot of sense that he just wanted to go away and just rot because he felt like a complete failure, and that on top of Kylo Ren betraying him and all of that, he just couldn't take it. But instead, he pretty much just stays on that island for the entire movie and then, just dies. And then also, last thing that I remember to mention here, Snoke dies for some reason. Yeah. Honestly, while everything else in this movie that I hate, I feel like could have been redeemed in this movie, Snoke dying kind of just really put Episode 9 in a terrible place. That could have been fixed with good writing. The 9th movie could have been pretty good with, a competent writer, but that didn't happen. So, the fixes for this movie that I would do would be pretty similar to the last one, although Snoke wears a gray outfit. There is some of the same stuff I mentioned last time. Rey struggles with everything she does, she's not as completely overpowered, blah blah blah. I'd say Luke doesn't die, Snoke doesn't die, those would be very good for the movie. I also think that if Rose's character wasn't just completely destroyed throughout the movie, then that would have been really a good character potential. Like the idea of having someone who's fighting in the Resistance because of some family members dying along with the Resistance is a pretty good backstory. But when Finn's arc was ending, he was about to save everyone from the First Order by blowing up the cannon. Rose just kind of saves his life and is like, hey, it's not about destroying what we hate, it's about just saving what we love, which was exactly what Finn was doing, so although I do think some people hate it a little too much, in my opinion, but that's just me. Again, my opinion. It doesn't have to be your opinion. Stop. Also, I do think if a lot more of the movie was focused on Rey and her training, and it showed a lot more of her training, I think that would have been a lot better than having so many scenes dedicated to the whole Poe thing and the whole, Finn and Rose going off to find a codebreaker. I think if they replaced Admiral Holdo with someone more likable, Admiral Akbar, like if Admiral Akbar had survived that part where Princess Leia learns how to fly in space, then he could have just done everything that Holdo did, except he's actually pretty smart, so he would be like, hey, this is exactly what I'm going to do, and this is when we're going to do it in, a little while. To all the scenes where Poe's like, this is kind of weird, and all of the entire arc of Finn and Rose going off to do whatever can be cut from the movie, meaning there's a lot less time in the movie, there's a lot less runtime in the movie that can be filled in with Rey training scenes or just a lot more of the flashback, because we don't really know much about anything that happened between episode 6 and 7. We don't know how the First Order rose to power. We could have this come back through flashbacks, both maybe Poe's backstory and Luke being kind of depressed. We could have both of those reveal more about the past. Overall, I think this movie has some really good highs, but a lot of really, really bad lows. And I think the smart decision would have been to delay episode 9 to make it the best you possibly can. Anyways, moving on.
You serious?
So there are big and small problems with The Rise of Skywalker. There are a lot of problems, and I'm going to try to sum them all up in a couple minutes. Okay, so starting with the big problems. Number 1, Emperor Palpatine comes back. That's really stupid. Not only because it doesn't make any sense, there is zero explanation for why. The only explanation is him saying, the dark side of the Force is attacked with many abilities, some considered to be unnatural. That's literally the entire explanation. It's not even an explanation. It's just a line from the prequels. This also completely undermines what was left of the original trilogy, because guess what? Now all of Darth Vader's accomplishments don't matter, and Luke and Anakin are no longer the chosen ones. Oh my goodness, now Rey is. Also, the final battle could have been improved so much. Oh my goodness. It could have been improved so much if they had just done more with the Force Ghosts calling out to Rey.
Rey, the Force will be with you. Always.
Let your death be the final word in the story of rebellion. I am all the Sith.
And I... I'm all the Jedi.
around when they were brought up to the sky? Wouldn't that kind of like, cause some problems? Also, if they all have Death Star lasers, then what if one of them accidentally shoots the ground? Doesn't that just mean the entire planet explodes? So what if the good guys just hijacked one of those and then exploded the planet? Yeah, that moment with Lando so hard and it just doesn't work. You don't have all of the build up to it, you just try to do it out of nowhere. I've seen some people really like the scene where Kylo talks to the Force Ghost of Han, except, hold on, wait a minute, Han isn't Force sensitive. That's not a Force Ghost. That's just Kylo Ren having a schizophrenic episode. Also, Rey, you're not a Skywalker. First off, you didn't get your hand chopped off, and you're literally not a Skywalker. Stop pretending to be so. Identity theft is not a joke. And I would say that there are positives to this movie, but there are none. And I would say that I could probably fix this movie with the same plot, but the plot doesn't even make sense. If I had to completely redo this entire movie, that would have to be in a completely separate video because that would take an hour and a half to explain. And it's unreal how this movie exists. It feels like we're in an alternate reality from some prime timeline where the movies were actually half decent. There are so many management flaws with this movie. I don't even understand how this happened. There are so many management flaws with the entire trilogy of these movies. And here, I'm going to talk about them now. First up is, instead of taking a legend storyline or the sequel trilogy of, I think, comic books or something like that had already been in place, instead of taking something from that after decanonizing all of the Legends books, and games and whatever, they decided to make their own storyline, which would have been okay, if they did it in a competent way. But instead, they hired the director of Lost, J.J. Abrams, who is pretty much famous for, not concluding storylines. Yeah, that guy, they decided to have him conclude the entire Star Wars saga. And I say conclude with air quotes, you can't see me right now, but they're for sure going to make another trilogy. They're going to make a fourth trilogy at some point. I know it's coming, and you can bet it'll be terrible. They also just kind of tried to have a creative send-off because they didn't have a roadmap. So originally, J.J. Abrams is going to direct The Force Awakens, Rian Johnson is going to direct The Last Jedi, so both of them actually directed their movies, and then some other third guy was going to direct the 9th movie, but then they didn't because they left or something. I can't remember their name for the life of me. But because these directors pretty much get to do whatever they want as long as it fits with Kathleen Kennedy's vision, which, really didn't align with the original Star Wars vision, then they could do whatever they want, so this ended up just having all of the characters from the original trilogy, with the exception of Chewbacca, just die. There were so many chances where this could have gone better. There were so many chances for this trilogy to be better, for this trilogy to be a better trilogy, to be comprised of better movies, but it's not. And even if you like both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, I don't see how you can like The Rise of Skywalker. I can see how you can like The Force Awakens, I can see how you could like The Last Jedi, possibly. But no matter what way you look at it, The Rise of Skywalker is just not written well. It's just plot hole after plot hole, mistake after mistake with The Rise of Skywalker, and I'm just kind of done. I do think that it is possible that history will look back kindly on The Force Awakens and maybe even The Last Jedi, the way that the prequels are looked back on with more kindness nowadays. But the problems with the sequel trilogy are very different to the problems with the prequel trilogy. But I don't think Star Wars has the same momentum that it has before in the past. Sure, it'll still be a popular franchise, but I don't think it is the most classic popular franchise that people grow up with in the future. I think right now that might even just be the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There is still potential for the future of Star Wars. I do think things like the Kenobi Disney Plus series are probably going to be pretty good. I'll definitely review them when they make their way to actually being released. Although Indiana Jones is probably screwed because they're trying to make another Indiana Jones movie, and I just can't see that going well. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm probably not. I cannot see that going well. I think Indiana Jones is probably just the next in the line of just stuff that Disney wants to reboot and then does terribly on. That being said, thanks for watching. Click every button you see below this video except the dislike button, so just like, subscribe, comment, whatever, I don't care. Alright.